Madeleine and her boyfriend Antoine are happy together and are vacationing in Corsica. Among other things, they are also bound by common interests. Both dream of pursuing a career in politics. Antoine introduced his beloved to Gabrielle Dervas, his uncle's wife, and other relatives. Most of them are somehow involved in politics. During a lavish dinner in a rented cottage, Antoine shared that after graduating from university, he and Madeleine plan to work in the Ministry of Labor or Education. Antoine's father, Bertrand Mandeville, believes they should be more ambitious, but Antoine wants to be where he can make a difference. Madeleine agrees. However, Bertrand didn't take these words seriously because his son has always lived in affluence and doesn't know the reality. Madeleine was curious to ask Gabrielle why she didn't push her revolutionary bill on workers' independence through to the end as a minister. Gabrielle replied that she wasn't confident enough. Without government support, Gabrielle decided to resign. Madeleine, however, believes that Gabrielle should have fought and sought support from the public. Madeleine herself is an activist and dreams of changing many things in her country. The next morning, the young couple decided to go for a drive. Antoine was annoyed by a phone call from his father, who was worried about the son's upcoming exams. The car ahead was driving too slowly, so Antoine started honking and showed the driver an insulting gesture. Madeleine didn't understand why that was since they weren't in a hurry. Suddenly the driver overtook them and blocked the road with his car. The guy approached them and began rudely demanding explanations from Antoine about his rude behavior on the road. Antoine tried to resolve the situation peacefully, but the guy taking a rifle from his car clearly wasn't inclined to do so, believing that tourists like Antoine and his girlfriend had no right to behave like that in a foreign country. In the end, the guy forced Antoine out of the car and, leaving the rifle in the back of his truck, began to threaten him. Madeleine had to intervene. Taking the rifle, she ordered the guy to release Antoine, but the aggressive driver didn't believe that Madeleine was capable of shooting. However, when he approached closer, she did it. The couple fled the scene of the crime. Antoine decided to hide the rifle in the forest, believing that they couldn't go to the police, otherwise Madeleine would end up in prison. Together they buried the rifle. Later, the couple pondered what to do next. Antoine received a call and found out that he and Madeleine were allowed to take the exams, but their thoughts were far from that now. Returning to the cottage, they washed away all traces of themselves. At night Madeleine couldn't sleep, neither could Gabrielle, who started asking the girl questions about her family. Madeleine revealed that her mother passed away long ago, and she doesn't communicate with her father. Gabrielle couldn't help but notice that Madeleine was unusually quiet today. The next morning, the police visited them and talked to Antoine. Madeleine pretended to be surprised by the police presence in the house. Antoine's father told her about yesterday's incident on the road. It turned out that the guy didn't perish but fell into a coma. This complicates things for Madeleine. Nevertheless, she readily agreed to answer Lieutenant Hassani's questions. The injured guy's name is Charles Luciani. Madeleine explained that she spent the whole day yesterday with Antoine on the coast. Also, Madeleine mentioned that on the way back, she fell asleep in the car and didn't remember the road. Unlike Antoine's phone, her phone wasn't tracked because it remained at home charging. The lieutenant took her testimony and left. After that, Madeleine and Antoine discussed what they told the officer and realized that there were discrepancies in their stories. They could only hope that Charles wouldn't come out of the coma or would lose his memory. Madeleine woke up at 5 in the morning by the alarm clock, and while getting ready and drinking coffee, she recited exam questions aloud. All day Madeleine continued to prepare. Antoine disappeared somewhere and only appeared in the evening, announcing that Charles had passed away in the hospital. Unable to hold back, Antoine burst into tears. He didn't want to be involved in something like this. Madeleine hugged her beloved in an attempt to comfort him. The next morning, Madeleine was about to catch a train. She tried to call Antoine, but he didn't answer. Madeleine was taking the exam in front of the admissions committee. She talked about her ideas for preventing environmental disasters and more. When asked about the acceptability of lying in the pursuit of a political career, Madeleine was confused and saw Charles Luciani in front of her. Unable to bear it, Madeleine left, got on the train again and came to Antoine's apartment, but he didn't open the door. Madeleine didn't know what to think. Out of desperation, she went to her father, whom she hadn't seen in many years. Yvonne immediately suspected that something was wrong, although the daughter claimed she just missed him. She agreed to stay for dinner. At some point, Madeleine revealed that she was responsible for the demise of a person in Corsica. Madeleine didn't want this at all. She was only trying to protect Antoine. Madeleine also didn't hide that she and Antoine had buried the crime weapon in the forest. Madeleine is sure that Antoine won't spill the beans, but since he's not in touch, she's completely alone. Of course, Yvonne allowed his daughter to stay with him. When the girl went to her house to get some things, she received a call from Gabrielle. They soon met. Gabrielle is worried that Antoine didn't show up for the exam. Madeleine replied that she has no idea what's going on. Of course, Madeleine failed the exam, but Gabrielle believes it's for the best. From now on, Madeleine will assist Gabrielle in her projects. Perhaps this is the beginning of her political career. Antoine still hasn't been in touch. Madeleine only knows that he flew across the ocean, to the United States. Madeleine quickly got involved in political activities alongside Gabrielle, who is a deputy. Together they plan to defend workers' rights. It seems that Gabrielle listened to her words and decided to fight. Now the two of them are working on the project that Gabrielle once started. In the office, the women rehearsed a speech. Madeleine played the role of the opponent, parrying Gabrielle's arguments to prepare her for all the tricky questions of the upcoming interview. Soon Gabrielle appeared on television. Madeleine is confident that she will succeed in the political arena. It hasn't been long, and Madeleine has already become indispensable to Gabrielle as an assistant. The girl really works hard. Soon during another speech by Gabrielle, when Madeleine was sitting among the audience, Antoine and his father entered. Madeleine became nervous, although she tried not to show it. After the speech, Madeleine and Antoine finally had the opportunity to talk alone. It turned out that Antoine returned 10 days ago. He received an invitation to a position as an advisor in the minister's office. There was tense silence between the former lovers. They never dared to talk about the incident in Corsica. Antoine needed to return to the reception. Madeleine didn't want to be there, so she lied to Gabrielle that she had urgent matters. The next morning Madeleine overslept. She had many messages on her phone from Gabrielle, as well as from Antoine, who suggested having dinner. During the office meeting, Gabrielle noticed that Madeleine was not concentrating. She assumed it was because Antoine was now their political rival. When Gabrielle suggested going to the opera together tonight, Madeleine politely declined. That same evening, she met Antoine at a restaurant. They ordered drinks, conversing only about general and political topics. Finally, Antoine dared to ask his former girlfriend if she was currently seeing someone. Judging by Madeleine's silence, she had met someone. When Antoine mentioned that he had also met someone, Madeleine couldn't take it and left. Antoine followed her, admitting that it was a lie. In reality, he's not seeing anyone. Antoine regrets leaving Madeleine alone in such a situation. She didn't want to continue the conversation, unsure how to react. Returning home, Madeleine felt a foreign presence. She sees Charles everywhere. Madeleine received a call from Antoine. The next day during the office meeting, she was again not concentrating, constantly being distracted by messages from Antoine, who asked to meet. Secretly from Gabrielle, Madeleine met with Antoine after all. Despite the fact that Gabrielle is his family, he works for her opponent, Thomas Peltier. But now for Antoine it doesn't matter. He still loves Madeleine and wants to be with her. Madeleine's feelings haven't faded either, but she can't forgive Antoine for leaving her alone and flying to America. It's too late now. Near her house, Madeleine saw the father, who came to visit her. Yvonne worries about his daughter, who previously planned to stay with him but never showed up. Yvonne thinks that his daughter is ashamed of him, only appearing when things are bad and disappearing when things are good. Madeleine doesn't feel guilty because after the mother's demise, the father did nothing for her. Madeleine paid for her education and did everything else. Yvonne would like to revisit their previous conversation, but Madeleine isn't ready to talk about Charles. Realizing he's not welcome, Yvonne left. Antoine called again, but Madeleine ignored his call. The next day during a meeting with representatives of the workers' cooperative, Madeleine received a message from Gabrielle, who as it turned out had been texting Antoine before. And he hinted to Gabrielle that her new assistant has a secret. Madeleine left the meeting early, trying to call her ex-boyfriend but he didn't answer. So Madeleine called his father, but Bertrand didn't want to talk to her, telling her not to bother his son anymore. Meeting Antoine in person, she demanded an explanation from him. Antoine told Madeleine that he can't stand seeing her constantly, so he wants her to disappear, otherwise everyone will find out her secret. Madeleine spat in her ex-boyfriend's face, who started to blackmail her. Antoine made it clear that he's not afraid of prison. Firstly, Madeleine fired the shot, not him, and secondly his father's lawyer will still get him off. Gabrielle wants to know what Antoine meant in that message. Madeleine assured her that Antoine has no leverage on her. He supposedly still loves her and is trying to get her back by any means necessary. The next day, Peltier addressed the workers' cooperative. The people immediately began to express their dissatisfaction with the fact that at the minister's initiative, the factory will be sold to Bertrand Mandeville. The fact that Bertrand's son now works for Peltier only worsens suspicions of a fraudulent scheme. The minister's speech ended in a complete failure, which was a victory for Gabrielle and Madeleine. The next call from the president's office was decisive. It seems they achieved their goal. In the evening, Madeleine left a voicemail for her father, apologizing for that evening and suggesting dinner at a restaurant. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. Antoine stood on the doorstep, entering the apartment without invitation. He told Madeleine straight away that his father believes she used their family for her political career. Madeleine replied that it's not true. Antoine knows that. Without saying anything else, he left. The next day in Gabrielle's office, she was talking to someone on the phone. Her voice sounded concerned. The secretary approached Madeleine and informed her that someone was waiting for her. A few minutes later, Gabrielle saw through the window as some people led Madeleine into a car. Both Gabrielle and her assistant looked frightened. Madeleine was arrested. The lawyer asked her to be honest, otherwise the court would believe Antoine Mandeville's testimony. If Madeleine's guilt is proven, she faces 10 years in prison. Madeleine's life turned upside down. Obviously Gabrielle Dervas, after the assistant's arrest, will try by all means to maintain her reputation. Despite everything, Madeleine continues to work and prepared a draft of a speech for Gabrielle before her upcoming speech in Parliament. Later, Madeleine called Gabrielle and assured her that everything is under control and that the lawyer is doing her job. At the next meeting with her lawyer, Madeleine realized that Antoine's version is more than convincing. The advantage is that the crime weapon still hasn't been found. But if they find it and if Madeleine's fingerprints are on it, for her it'll be over. Soon Madeleine heard on the radio that Gabrielle postponed the introduction of her bill in Parliament. Given the situation in Parliament is not the most favorable right now. This broke Madeleine. At the first opportunity when she called Gabrielle, she asked what was going on. Gabrielle asked her former assistant never to call this number again. She sided with the nephew and decided to back away from her political agenda. Madeleine knows for sure that Gabrielle did this under pressure from the influential relatives, but she couldn't persuade her to continue the fight. The prison guard informed Madeleine that she had a visitor and led her to the visiting room. This time it wasn't her lawyer, but her father. Yvonne hinted that he was the one who found and hid the crime weapon. Now the police will never find it. Madeleine felt a glimmer of hope. Soon the police took Madeleine to the crime scene for a reconstruction of events. Antoine was already here and was confident of his victory. Unexpectedly Madeleine changed her testimony, claiming that she wasn't with Antoine that day. Allegedly she had previously stated the opposite to provide her fiancé with an alibi. Madeleine's words seemed convincing because Antoine's phone was tracked, but hers wasn't. His DNA was found at the crime scene, but hers wasn't. This version also explains why she didn't memorize the route. According to Madeleine, Antoine was supposed to pick her up at 4. He was a little late, but overall, he behaved as usual. When Antoine received a call from his lawyer and learned that Madeleine had changed her story, he was shocked. Soon Madeleine was released from custody, with all charges dropped. The father met her. When they got into the car, they hugged each other. Madeleine was sincerely grateful to her father. In advance, Yvonne picked up his daughter's mail. In the envelope was a commemorative pen from Gabrielle. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel not to miss more exciting new products. Also, the authors will be pleased if you leave your opinion in the comments.